welcome to our walk through Psalm 101. We're on verse 3 now, but first of all, before we get going, let's have a look at the question that you need to keep in mind as we go through this session. Give a definition of idolatry and give examples in modern society. And the second half of verse 3 says this: the deeds of faithless men I hate. They will not cling to me. The New International Version says, I hate all who deal crookedly. I will have nothing to do with them. The New Living Version has it this way: I hate the work of those who are not faithful. It will not get hold of me. And the title theme for this session is this: Lord, I refuse to idolize the faithless. Now, there are those who people idolize. Famous, rich, well-known, on television, in the movies, making music. Well, I might read about them. I might listen to them. I might enjoy what they're doing in certain ways. But should I support them? I could say at least I will not act in any way that shows that I admire them as people. Let's have a look at a definition of idolatry. An extreme admiration, love, or reverence for something or someone. In Judaism and Christianity and Islam, idolatry would be described in this way: the worship of someone or something other than God as though it were God, or any affection or obsession that takes the place of godly worship. In the book of Jonah, it says this: those who regard vain idols forsake their faithfulness. Let's talk about fame. It's so much part of our American culture. We can't get enough of famous people. We see them on television, we see them in magazines, we talk about them all the time. When we pay attention to powerful, influential people, while at the same time disregarding their character, we edge toward idolatry. You could say we idolize fame, even though so many famous people are moral and social failures. When you go through the checkout line in the supermarket, you see those magazines that are stacked there. Check out the headlines, the pictures, the disasters in people's lives, a long list of famous, abject failures, although we in our culture see them as the successful people. Now, this is, without doubt, the saddest page I have shown you in this series. This is a list of famous people who have committed suicide in the last 10 years. But in fact, this is only the A and B list, the names that begin with A or B. The rest of the alphabet, all the other letters, are just as cluttered with famous people who have committed suicide within the last decade. See, the foibles and the failures of famous people are all too well known to us. So there must be something wrong in our attention to fame. It could even be said, how sick do we get when we want to be famous like some of the least successful people in the world, but the most famous? There's a ministry called ministrywatch.com, and they look into various ministries, and sadly they've found the foibles and failures of fame in Christian ministries. They say this: unfortunately, in many cases, the longer leaders remain in leadership, the more relaxed they become about their principles and conviction. There's a great story. When Jean and I were in Canada, we were part of Youth with a Mission in Canada. And at one time, there was a ministry consultant came to visit the leadership team. And the first thing he said was, look, if I'm going to give you help, if I'm going to give you advice, there's one question I ask first and foremost, and that is, who can say no to the director of this ministry? And when we asked why he'd asked that question, he said, well, I went to a very famous ministry recently. And he said, and I asked my first question: who can say no to, and then he mentioned the name of the famous preacher. And the CEO of the ministry smiled because the famous preacher was in the room and said, "Believe me, sir, no one can say no to," and then he said the name of the famous preacher. Only a few months later, I was watching television down in Florida with a friend of mine, and we saw the confession and the tears and hopefully the repentance of that same famous preacher as he had morally crashed, because no one could say no to him. He had been allowed, sadly, to come into a place where he was idolized. That is idolatry, just as much as some Old Testament person bowing down before a golden idol somewhere in the desert. As you grow into your life, always prioritize godly character over earthly attributes, abilities, power, wealth, even popularity. Jesus said, "Woe to you in the day when all men speak well of you," because that's the way they spoke of the false prophets. You see, it's very easy to stray into idolatry.